Good morning. Our program will begin in 5 minutes. Please take your seats and silence your cell phones. Welcome to the opening general session, sponsored by Thales Alenia Space. Please welcome Satellite Executive Chairman Jeffrey Hill.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Satellite 2023's opening general session. Today, we are honored to welcome more than 13,000 attendees who have traveled here from all parts of the globe to be with us here in Washington, D.C. for this annual celebration of satellite technology. The Axis Intelligence team and I would like to thank all of you very much for making the trip. We also thank Thales Alenia Space, our longtime supporter of our opening general session, and the community here at the Satellite Show. Before we begin, I'd like to share this video message from our session sponsor, Thales Alenia Space. Thanks again to Thales Alenia Space and the team for their continued support of this event. Satellites provide a service to the world that improves lives, saves lives, and connects people to ideas that enlightens and inspires lives. As we've seen throughout the past year, they are the world's most critical tool throughout natural disaster events, global conflict, and in studying the impact of our changing environment. This morning's opening general session gathers the leaders and pioneers who are shaping these tools for today's world and future generations to address significant and dynamic shifts on the horizon for the commercial satellite and space industries. This discussion sets the tone for the year, and it begins with a very special fireside chat with Dave Limp, Senior Vice President of Devices and Services for Amazon's Project Kuiper, which aims to drastically increase global broadband access through constellations of satellites in low Earth orbit. Dave Limp oversees the development, retail sales, and operational aspects of Amazon's consumer electronic devices and the services behind them. He started his career at Apple, where he held various positions, including director of the North and South American PowerBook division. He also served in leadership roles at Liberate Technologies and Palm, and as a venture partner of Azure Capital Partners. We are honored to have him here for a fireside chat with my longtime colleague and co-conspirator Mark Holmes, Senior Editorial Director via Satellite, who will also lead the General Session Executive Panel following the interview. Please join me in welcoming Satellite 2023's featured keynote speaker, Dave Limp, and our General Session host, Mark Holmes.
How you doing? You doing good? Good? So I guess you want to learn a little bit about Project Kuiper today, right? Yes. Okay, Dave, welcome to Satellite 2023. Let's get straight into it. You've been quiet for quite a long time, and you're now on stage at Satellite. Tell us right here, right now, where are we with Project Kuiper?
Well, we've made a lot of progress. It was just a piece of paper with an idea on it 4 years ago, and the team has been working hard. And it really stems from this idea that we have these leadership principles at Amazon, and one of them states, with success and scale come broad responsibility. And we really felt like broadband and the sort of divide from those that are underserved and unserved was broad, and that with our balance sheet and our expertise and our technical acumen, that we could make a difference here. And so That's when we set out with Project Kuiper to build a LEO satellite. Amazon's never put anything into space. We didn't know how to do it. We had to build a team, but we've made a lot of progress. And I'm really happy to say that our first 2 prototype satellites were put on a truck a couple days ago, and they're on their way to the Cape. And you know, God willing, the winds are right, we're going to launch them here in a couple weeks. So it's going to be great.
Wow, exciting.
Oh, there they are, actually. So yeah, that's
super exciting news. I mean, there's obviously been a lot of speculation about your plans. Tell us about the long-term plan and vision for the project. Who do you see as like the primary customers for Kuiper? And what is the balance between sort of residential, enterprise, and government customers? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, you know, it's very easy to sit up here and say there is hundreds of millions of customers that don't have great access to broadband, fixed broadband. And, you know, I think our minds all of a sudden wander to sub-Saharan Africa or to into an indigenous tribe somewhere, but it's actually much broader than that. You know, you go 100 miles away from where we are right now, and there are still people living on copper that was laid into the ground in the 50s and 60s. And running at DSL speeds. And we were just talking about it. We just came out of the pandemic, or most of us have come out of this pandemic, and we discovered that we had an entirely new sort of appreciation for what broadband means, especially in your home. And you know, my home became a school, it became a short order kitchen, it became a movie theater, and each one of these required bandwidth. And so as we thought about that, you know, that we really do believe that there are hundreds of millions of people all throughout the globe that are obviously have access to this. And that's obviously represents the consumer segment. But equally as important when you think about the tasks for enterprise, I know a lot of those customers in the audience, and how we need to track assets, how we need to do backhaul for 5G. Things like Kuiper can help immensely with these kinds of tasks. And I wouldn't also say, you know, that the sort of government workloads are increasingly important too. You know, if any time in my life I've seen that access to information leads towards, you know, freedom, it's never been more apparent than it is right now. And I think, again, a system like Kuiper can do great good for those kinds of workloads as well.
I just have a follow-on question. You mentioned about the pandemic there, and you know, your home became a school. Did the pandemic change anything in terms of the approach with Kuiper?
Well, like I think everything technically, it made it harder. We had to get teams to be able to work through really tough times. But I think we got more convicted about the opportunity. You know, we already thought it was a big opportunity and one that could really make a difference around the world. But that event and how it impacted so many people's lives, it just reinforced that the importance of this, and I would also say the urgency. You know, I'd go to a lot of meetings, talk about Kuiper, and I think the almost unanimous thing that I hear from customers of all types is, why can't you do it quicker? And trust me, that's what I'm telling the team too. But, you know, unfortunately, we have these pesky physics in our way, so yeah.
Those pesky physics. I mean, there's a lot of activity, as we know, in LEO. I mean, LEO's been a buzz at this event for the last, you know, few years. Amazon is obviously arriving later than Starlink and OneWeb. What do you expect will differentiate Kuiper compared to these other systems that are further advanced? Yeah,
I think there's a number of things. You know, I think it's very easy to talk about the satellite, and I will talk some about that. But, you know, the thing about these systems, when you're going to put 3,000 plus satellites in LEO constellation, the network is equally important. And one of the things that Amazon is great at is building the network that supports a lot of the internet that we love today. And through Amazon Web Services and those kinds of things, we have a huge amount of fiber, we run a huge amount of traffic for the internet, and we're bringing that expertise to bear. Another thing when you're going to run a system like this with tens of millions of customers is you want world-class customer service. I think there's nothing more frustrating than if your internet is down and you can't talk to somebody. But any of you that have had an interaction with Amazon, and you had to ask, where is my shipment? You know, you've gotten to talk to a human being very quickly. We're great at customer service. And then I would also say that you have to be great at making the costs of these things. And one of the things that we obsess at Amazon is how to constantly lower the costs for these things. The Achilles heel for all these LEO constellations in the past, and the road is littered with the failures that we've all kind of seen over the years, is that to scale them, you have to get the cost of the customer premise equipment dramatically lower. Otherwise, the business model just doesn't vet. You can put it into whatever spreadsheet you want, and it's just not gonna pencil out. And to make this kind of investment, and we're putting $10 billion plus into Project Kuiper before we're going to see much cash flow at all. And we're doing that because the business model does vet, and we do see a path because we've invented our way into a place where the customer premise equipment can be lower cost.
Okay, I mean, you oversee Amazon devices and services, which includes things like Echo, Fire TV, and Ring. How does Kuiper fit into that organization? And what assets and capabilities from Amazon's other businesses play into building Kuiper?
Yeah, I talked a bit about our networking capabilities through AWS. The other one I would say is there is just a secular shift towards the cloud. And so as workloads move up into the cloud, they'll be in data centers. Amazon has a large number of those. And by having those workloads close to the Kuiper network, we can be more performant. So if it's streaming a movie from Netflix or it's getting Salesforce data for your enterprise, those workloads are often closely aligned to Amazon Web Services, and our network is going to be substantially the same as what that is. So you get a lot of proximity benefit from the fact that we run a very large cloud service as well. The other thing I would say, it's I've been doing some version of this job, consumer electronics, for almost 30 years now, and what is very easy in this job is to build a prototype. I could sit up here and show you prototype after prototype of consumer electronics projects that we've worked on throughout the years. But what is very hard is getting them to mass volume and making them manufacturable. And when you have to think about, as you mentioned, an Echo or a Fire TV, we build tens of millions of these things every quarter. And I could easily come out here and show you one, but to build tens of millions of them. And the same thing is true with our customer terminals. We're going to have to be able to build tens of millions of those. And I think the organization's manufacturing expertise comes into play there. And we're going to have to build 3 to 5 satellites a day. And so if you think about this industry, which has done amazing things over the years, you might build a satellite every 3 to 5 years. That might have been record pace for some of these very complicated birds. And so when you think about the satellites that we have to build, we can't use the same playbook. We have to take the playbook from consumer electronics and bring it to aerospace rather than the other way around.
Okay, that moves us nicely onto the customer equipment. Why is this such an important variable in the equation, and what type of progress have you been making there?
We made a lot of progress. I'll show you the first two of our prototypes here. We've made a lot of progress. First of all, I think we'll show for the first time here. Thanks, Phil. That's great. We'll show you both of the 2 core antennas that are built into our system. Yeah, I clap too. That's good. The first one on your right is our enterprise-based antenna. And so one of the things that we did with Kuiper from the very beginning is we built a symmetric KA architecture. So we're KA up from the terminals here, and we're KA down through parabolics to ground stations around the world. And that has allowed us to innovate dramatically in the customer terminals that you see here today. First of all, they're completely solid state. They're smaller than you would expect. They're dramatically lower cost. Now, don't get me wrong, that does not come for free. Our satellites have more mass. They require more power because we are running KA. But what we wanted to do was put the complexity for that and innovate low cost for that in space and drive the prices dramatically down here. So on your right, you see our enterprise antenna. This is gigabit-based performance in a very small form factor. Will be great for everything from backhaul from 5G base stations to tracking assets in distant communities and those kinds of things. We're really excited about the performance of this on the bench so far and can't wait to see how it does against the prototype satellites. And then we showed an early version of this, the smaller and the main customer antenna here. This one is it really is the sort of linchpin to the whole system, because before the team Before we green-lighted buying a lot of launch capacity, growing the team to well over 1,000 people now, we first had to hit this milestone because, again, the business model is predicated on getting the cost of these terminals, where there'll be tens of millions of these, lower. And the team did some amazing innovations. I'll show you a few later, but the biggest one was being able to basically overlap, send and receive into the same solid state beamforming antenna. And that got the size of this down. It's, I often say it shows my age, but it's about the size of an LP record. And these are spinny black discs for those that don't remember. And it's incredibly performant. We expect to see 400 megabits per second through this type of thing. And more importantly, under $400 BOM and MVNA. So we can produce these things en masse at a very low price point and get it to millions of customers in a very easy way.
That's super exciting. I mean, lots of companies have tried to build something like this. What do you think has been the difference and why you think you're able to do something like this?
Constraint breeds innovation, and I think from the very beginning, we put the constraints on this team to say, here is your cost envelope. By the way, that never changes. The nice thing about customers, they are divinely disconnect. So build a $400 antenna and they'll ask you to build a $200 antenna. The ball is always moving. But I think, for us, one of the biggest things was that it wasn't possible. When you sat around the room and you looked at what designs were capable, this wasn't something that just sat out there. There was no chip to go buy. There was no antenna to go get off the shelf. You had to invent. And this is what this team did. And the major invention, and it's behind the satellite, it's behind our base station infrastructure, it's behind both of the antennas you see here. I actually brought one here, is this chip here. This is called Prometheus. This is as close to magic as I know. This is kind of an RF wonder house. And Prometheus is an amazing chip in that in this little ASIC, it's application-specific integrated circuit, we have the power of a base station, a typical kind of 5G base station. We have the power of the modem that's in your 5G phone. And we have the power of the most powerful backhaul system that you would see, say, from a microwave link from one to another. And that's all combined in this one little ASIC. Low power, incredibly low cost. And then we take dozens of these and we sprinkle them like pixie dust throughout our architecture. So there's some in the antenna, there's some up on the satellite, there's some in the base stations. And when they work in concert together, they're able to move incredibly large amounts of data in almost a seamless kind of fashion. To give you a sense of how much data, in that architecture through our satellites, 1 terabit worth of data can be moved through the Prometheus chips. So it's really unprecedented. And to do it at, give you a factor, it's 1/10 the cost, 1/10, an order of magnitude lower than if we had bought these kinds of parts off the shelf. And if we had bought them off the shelf, it would have been 10 times more expensive and not near the performance. So the way you get to this kind of thing is you invent, and that's Prometheus is a great example of that invention.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds fantastic. I mean, we talk about cost, we talk about size. How much smaller and cheaper or inexpensive do you think we can go here?
Yeah, I'm going to show you here. He's got a bit of a surprise. The team didn't want to do this, but we're going to do it anyway. But yeah, so I think again, this at $400 is a breakthrough. It's probably 2 to 2.5x less than any kind of customer premise equipment that you've seen. Well exceeds what anybody would consider broadband in the home. But if you really want to. If you think about the opportunity that we talked about, Mark, in the beginning, which is there are hundreds of millions of these customers, then you start getting into places where broadband is even less expensive or non-existent at all, and you might only have access to a 5G program. You might not have anything in a house or a school. You might be in a place that just has never even gotten any broadband infrastructure at all. They skipped copper, maybe went to 5G, or they don't have 5G at all. I was talking to somebody yesterday from Brazil who was saying they have 10,000 plus schools that just don't have any access to the internet. And it's just, we're all sitting around talking about, generative AI and chat XXX, and, here's schools that don't have access to the internet. So we really, again, wanted to invent for that. So we took the Prometheus chip that I talked about, and we, again, invented, and this is our newest, smallest antenna. So this gives you a sense of where we are here. And I'd be remiss if I didn't contrast it to a Kindle here. So there's a Kindle and there's your antenna. So this is dramatically different than anything you've ever seen from a LEO constellation or RF in general. And the thing about this antenna, it's about 7 inches square, and that really amazes me more than anything else is not only is it significantly less expensive than this, we're not going to talk about the price quite yet, but it is dramatically lower than what we're showing with this, but it still makes broadband performance. This is 100 megabit per second kind of performance level, and we think that this goes from the opportunity to tens of millions of customers to that broader opportunity where you can get to hundreds of millions of customers over time as we increase the size of the constellation and get exceedingly more bandwidth up there.
I mean, it really is an incredible piece of technology. I mean, it all is, but it must be so exciting for you to showcase these for the first time today.
Yeah, it's been hidden in labs for a while now, and it's like we're kind of coming out of our shell a little bit. So, and I think now as we start seeing the technologies come off the bench, start coming into fruition, into reality, we have a lot ahead of us, though, obviously. I think I'm not taking anything from the hard work the team has done building these antennas and Prometheus, but we also don't have anything in space yet. So we're going to learn a lot when we launch here early May, and we're going to see, and it's risky, but we're going to learn a lot. And then I think the thing that I'm most excited about, though, is that when you start seeing the puzzle pieces come together, the Lego blocks getting built out here, that you can now see this constellation, coming to life. And we're at a point now where we're not waiting for the results from our proto-satellites. We have enough bench data, we have enough simulations that we're actually going to go and start our production-based satellites. We should have multiple satellites done by the end of the year, and then we can start launching those in earnest. We've obviously secured a lot of launch capacity. That gives us confidence that we can get these to space. And if anything else, we're kind of, if you're out there and you're interested in partnering and you're wanting to understand more, consider us. We haven't been able to say this for the last 4 years, but kind of consider us open for business. We got a lot of work to do to get these satellites up into the sky, but the technology is kind of vetted out enough that we're pretty confident now.
You touched upon launch capability there, and obviously you've acquired a lot of launch capability, and obviously you're making a lot of progress, and we're seeing that today really for sort of the first time. I mean, this industry, though, is notorious for sort of long delays, though. How far off is all of this, and what are the next steps? And, maybe we can talk a little bit about the launch side into that as well.
Yeah, so we've reserved 77, you know this, but 77 heavy lift or medium heavy or heavy lift launch vehicles. The nature of this, I mentioned it earlier, but by going to a symmetric KA architecture, we do have a larger satellite than a typical LEO satellite. I think you're starting to see the industry go this way. So I wouldn't say we were prescient, but I think we did sort of look around the corner and know that a slightly larger vehicle, one of the costs of that slightly larger vehicle, as I mentioned, is mass. And so to make, again, the economics of this launch is a part of the economics of this, the terminal is the biggest variable, is to just get as many satellites up on each launch as you possibly can. So by getting heavy launch vehicles, Ariane and Vulcan and New Glenn and perhaps others over time, it gives us the ability to put a reasonable amount of these vehicles up on every launch and fill out the constellation as quickly as we can. So those are reserved. The first 2 prototype satellites will go up on the first Vulcan flight here in May. And then we'll start production satellite launches in earnest in 24. And we still believe we're on schedule to have over half the constellation up by mid-26, which is sort of part of our license. And then, as we fill it out, so too we'll be getting licenses around the world to make sure that either through partners or directly that we can give access to Kuiper globally. I think it's important to have this infrastructure for the U.S., but it's equally as importantly to make this a global system.
No, it's a fascinating timeline. If Kuiper is successful, obviously you're hoping you're putting a lot of billions of dollars into this. What does this actually mean for the future of Amazon? I mean, put it into sort of context of the importance of Kuiper in the overall scheme of things for Amazon.
Yeah, Amazon, we're very lucky to have multiple businesses at scale. Between our retail business, our marketplace business, and AWS, these are market segments that Amazon represents. Even though we're a large company, we represent kind of a fraction of the size of those. So to move the needle on Amazon does take a big idea, but I do think Kuiper is that kind of idea. And as I said, as I started, the Venn diagram of good ideas that can be very good businesses, and I do believe this can be a very good business if we can control our technology and control our costs. When they overlap with what could also be good for society, that's your happy place. I kind of go back to my roots. I've been at Amazon for 13 years, and I think about the only product that it was in our portfolio, my portfolio when we started the team, was Kindle. But Kindle has a little bit of that. It's a good business. Anybody would love to run the Kindle business. It's great for authors because they don't have to find publishers to get their books out to customers anymore. And it's great for readers. It helps people be more literate and they get more access to content. And so when you see those, again, the Venn diagram overlapping between a good business and something that's good for society, it puts a smile on your face. And I think this is a similar kind of business. We have obviously a lot to prove out over the next few years, but if we're successful, it can be a very good, large business for Amazon, and I think it can change a lot of consumers' lives. It can make enterprises more productive, and it can help governments in many different ways. So I think that makes me just in my happy place.
Fantastic. And one final question. We spoke about the prototype satellites. When might we see, or when do you think is a realistic time frame to have the first commercial customer?
I would say we'll definitely be in beta testing, where with commercial customers in 24. So that's for sure. Whether or not we can flip over to actual production workloads will kind of depend on the application and where that application is. The way that we're launching the constellation, we get sort of latitude by latitude as we launch them, and so you're going to have to get to critical mass at certain latitudes to meet certain workloads. Other workloads might be a little bit more flexible. But for sure we'll be beta testing with large customers in 24. So again, that's why I kind of tossed it out to anybody out there that's interested. We're happy to chat with you.
Well, fantastic. Well, I think we're just about out of time. Let's give Dave a big round of applause. What a great start to the opening general session. We will have a panel discussion shortly, but before that, we have a video to show you, and then we'll have a panel discussion. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Mark.
No longer relegated to the margins of the connectivity ecosystem, satellites are impacting millions of lives, global businesses, and government action. Today, there's unlimited opportunity for companies to take advantage of the efficiencies, savings, and benefits that satellite and space technology can offer. Take a look at just a few of the big milestones and headlines coming out of the satellite industry over the past year, and it's clear how mainstream the technology has become. At Satellite Conference and Exhibition, we'll both celebrate and examine these milestones and push the industry to the next level through discussions on stage, technology on the show floor, and connections between attendees, exhibitors, and speakers. This week, we invite you to lean into the disruptions and seize the opportunities coming your way during this period of exponential growth for the satellite and space industries. At Satellite, there are endless chances for you to link up with the people, technology, and ideas you need to progress your business. And it all starts with the opening general session, sponsored by Thales Alenia Space.
And now, let's welcome our panelists for this morning's general session.
Welcome. I hope you enjoyed that. I think that was a great start to the day. And now we have a fantastic opening general session. Let me just introduce everybody very quickly, and then we'll get straight into some questions. We have Eva Bernicke, the CEO of Eutelsat. Next to Eva, we have Mark Dankberg, the CEO of Viasat. Then we have Tim Ellis, the CEO of Relativity Space. David Kagan, the CEO of Globalstar, and Dave Waisgrass, the CEO of Intelsat. So let's give them a big welcome. I'm sure you know all of these companies very well, so we're not going to do introductory remarks. We're just going to get straight into the questions. So let's get a really good discussion going. Over the last 12 to 18 months, we've seen some big pieces of consolidation. Eutelsat OneWeb, Viasat, Inmarsat. Is this a realization that there'll only be room for a small number of global players by the end of this decade? Eva, we'll start with you on that one.
It's a great question, and I think everybody's asking themselves that, and then on top of that, which type of players. We had a bit of a discussion in the Constellation room yesterday about verticalization of it, but we do think that in the geo space, we've seen that there's some interesting consolidation going on. It's a market that does consolidate, and it's been expected for some years. And I think when you look at on the LEO side, just the way the spectrum works and the cost of LEO will probably also limit to a handful plus and minus of LEO operators. And then the question, of course, will be the combinations like Eutelsat and OneWeb that will combine both in multi-orbit. That's at least what we're betting on for the future.
Okay, Mark?
Well, I hope not. I mean, so we started as a very small company. You know, we've grown over time, and I think small companies contribute a lot to the ecosystem. So I think it would be sad if all it was the biggest companies. I think there's a place for each for sure, but I think we don't want to lose sight of innovation and the opportunity for change. And sometimes you need small companies.
Tim, you come at this from a slightly different perspective. What do you take as someone that's obviously looking to sell to these, these types of companies? How do you see it shaking out over the course of this decade?
Yeah, of course. Well, I think certainly as far as the launcher space, I don't see the odds of a lot of consolidation, actually. I think most launch companies' technology is so bespoke and so specific to the systems that they're actually developing that until there's a robust set of very competitive launch vehicles, maybe there would be horizontal consolidation amongst launch companies. I think it would be much more likely, actually from what we see as far as the demand of launch being so much higher than the supply of launch, that there may actually be more consolidation between payload companies that need to get things to space and realizing that launch is such a critical strategic part of their business. Essentially, you stay on the ground and don't make any money if you don't have launch. And I think that dynamic is actually getting heightened quite aggressively, even with players like Dave, who was just up on stage before this, buying so many rockets and so many other people trying to have big ambitions in space now.
Okay, let me go to...
Yeah, so I think this is just another cycle in the satellite industry. We've seen this before. It is a little different now. The big tech firms are in the industry, so it is quite possible that it will continue to consolidate. But I'm with Mark. I agree. We don't want it to happen, but clearly it's another cycle, in my opinion.
You don't want it to happen, but do you see it happening?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Let me go to
Yeah, so I think we are in a transformational period, and it's not necessarily unique to this particular industries. If you look at other industries, they all do go through cycles, and on occasion they go through these transformative times. And from my perspective, there's a lot of moving parts here, from the legacy players, both the large-scale legacy players, the next tier down, and there are a multitude of new players bringing new capabilities to the industry that in some way, shape, or form are going to be adopted up the food chain. My belief is that the SATCOM industry as a whole is going to look very, very different in 4 or 5 years from now than it does today.
Does everyone agree with that?
You don't have to agree, it's my view.
I know, or disagree.
And since it's my view, I am right, okay?
We'll see that we'll come back to you in 5 years' time.
Okay.
I'll stick with you, Dave, actually, for the next question. I mean, everyone's touched upon it. We are seeing some very ambitious business plans at play here. You know, thousands upon thousands of satellites are potentially going up over the next few years. It's unprecedented in our industry. My question is who's going to be buying all of this capacity? Where are the new customers for this? If we're talking, and we're going to start with you, Dave, and anyone who wants to join in.
Okay, so I didn't coin this phrase. I think we've all seen it. I don't know who coined it, but it's a good phrase. You've got the underserved and unserved populations and geographic regions around the world. And that's a compelling opportunity, and it's a necessary opportunity that in some form or fashion, all of us here and throughout the industry will participate in serving. You have traditional markets that I think are still growing substantially. If you think about networks and enterprise in general, mobility in general, and there's new markets, right? Talk about 5G, 6G, we're all going to participate in rolling out globally those networks, those comm systems. And then there's new verticals that are beginning to demand the type of services that we offer. Think more so than in the past. Think agriculture, think energy, different types of industry. So I think, when you take it, at the end of the day, at some point, there's basic economics. You have the demand and supply curve that most of us learned in Econ 101. At some point, it levels out. But today, from everything that I've seen and read, the demand is continuing to, again, you have to stand back and take the global view, outpace the supply. At some point, it equalizes. But I think, again, there's enough areas of opportunity that for the next few years, we're going to see, places to deliver our services.
Just to screw up your order here.
Perfectly fine.
Yes, because this is actually, it's a perfect question, and I think I've been fortunate enough to have quite a lot of investor discussions since our announcement of the combination with OneWeb. And the one question I get absolutely no pushback on is there a market out there? So is there a market out there for connectivity, and is there a market out there for satellite connectivity? Is simply accepted by everybody. Is it going to be 16 billion or 25 billion by 2030 is a good question, but that there's double-digit growth. Probably the majority of the growth coming into the non-GEO space, but there's also growth in the GEO space for connectivity. And I think the real interesting moment, if we as an industry can make satellite connectivity at a cost level where we actually start competing in the telecom world. Because that's where there's a totally different, it just needs 3 more zeros on the market, right? So that's where you open up a different market, and it's not that far away. And the guys for launching, you're on the hook for reducing some of the cost. Satellite manufacturers are on the hook for it. Terminal developers are certainly, if we can get it there, then the market is just probably 1,000 times bigger.
Well, one of the big things I think we all have to remember is this isn't just a business problem. Just going back to the first question in this one is, for a lot of countries, space is about national security, it's about sovereignty, it's not just about the business. And so I think that the notion that a very small number of gigantic multinational companies are going to go into countries and say, here's your answer. Just let us use all of the resources in space in order to deliver this. That's going to be hard. I think we're already seeing pushback on that. The other thing that because it's a space conference, we start with a space-centric answer, geo, non-geo. I think if you want to look at where the demand is, the unconnected are very largely in metro centers. They are not in remote areas. And so what that means is that the geographic concentration of a lot of that demand is very, very high. So when it comes to applying relatively scarce resources that are going to be contended by others, I think we're going to have to factor those in. And we've already seen that where, hey, just because you make a service available, hey, you can connect your cell phone to these satellites, does not mean that a country wants that to be done by an outsider to them or for them, right? So I think these are going to have significant impacts in the way the market develops and is deployed.
I'll take it in a different direction. So if I look back 5 years ago, and I look at my in-home router report last week, where just myself and my wife and my 4 kids are out of the house, thank goodness, but just me and my wife, we had 14 devices connected on the router. So if you think about that from a business perspective, where is the demand going to come? It is out there in commercial IoT type of applications. We call it complementary convergence of the satellite industry with the cellular industry is real now. We've talked about it for 20 plus years. I think we're now seeing that in fact it is being embraced. We are being embraced by the industry, satellite industry is being embraced by the cellular communications industry as well. So I think clearly, they're looking at us differently, and we know how many devices they have connected on their networks. And there's plenty of demand for all of the companies in this industry to grow.
Fantastic. I'm going to ask some individual questions now, Tim, so I'm going to get to you for a question, specifically on the launch side. Right now, we're seeing a number of delays in the launch market. Certain vehicles are late to market. We've had some high-profile launch failures recently. Supply is clearly not meeting demand right now. What are the overall implications of this, and how far away are we from this situation starting to ease?
Yeah, great question. So certainly, I haven't seen it. It's starting to be talked about a lot more openly, but certainly almost every company that we talk to is very worried about medium to heavy lift specifically. So really in the years 2024 to 2027, I think is probably the period of time talked about the most. There's a lot of people that are trying to hit specific deadlines for getting spacecraft in orbit. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, Amazon Kuiper buying up a lot of that capacity at prices that I'm sure were well above the most competitive in the commercial space, really is causing quite a big of issue. And they're not really the only ones that need launch. There's obviously a lot more people out there. And so what we're seeing overall is launch prices are actually being escalated to some extent. I think supply and demand imbalance usually results in that kind of thing from a fundamental economics perspective. But otherwise, it's just not really super clear who those companies are going to be that actually go and fill that gap. We are definitely at a place where kind of bad timing. We also have a lot of new vehicles that are as yet unproven, from ULA to Ariane 6. To New Glenn, to then even us with Relativity and Terran-R. None of those have flown yet. And so I think people are really waiting for these new vehicles to get into service. But then what's going to be very key and very important isn't just getting into service. Then it's, well, what launch ramp rate can you do? And effectively, how many hundreds of thousands of kilograms per year or millions of kilograms per year are you able to actually launch? Because when you look at it in a bulk kind of rate, and as a lot of these constellations get established, of course, it's not just initial deployments, it's all the resupply that's gonna happen. And so that's kind of how we're looking at it, structurally from a supply-demand basis.
Very, very interesting stuff. Let me go to David from Intelsat for the next question. Intelsat is somewhat of an anomaly amongst the traditional big operators. Eutelsat has bought OneWeb, SES has O3b. Telesat at this stage is still going ahead with Lightspeed. Will Intelsat need to do something pretty big to be part of what we hope will be a golden future for our industry?
Right, well, that's a leading question. So, look, Intelsat emerged from a financial restructuring about a year ago. And it's a real turnaround story. We had a tremendous, we performed tremendously well in 2022. Continued to advance multiple technologies that I talked to a little bit earlier. The team is highly motivated. We've developed a number of important partnerships and strategic alliances, both on the channel side and on the technology side. And the company grew for the first time year over year in well over a decade. So we're really, it's a real, like I said, a real turnaround story. So looking ahead, you know, we want to continue down that path, and there's a lot of different levers that we can look at. Excuse me. We'll continue to look at M&A and, you know, of varying sizes, and we will not shy away from opportunities that generate real value for all of our stakeholders. So that's kind of the way we're viewing it, and, you know, again, I'm looking to another very successful year in 23.
I'm just going to follow up. Multi-orbit.
I don't take follow-up questions. No.
Multi-orbit is going to be part of your future.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Oh, good. That's a good leading question too. So we have a very strong partnership with OneWeb, and that does advance our multi-orbit strategy. And we are very excited about the combination with Eutelsat and OneWeb. And the teams are working very well together to advance, you know, both their strategy and our multi-orbit capabilities.
And I'll just help you on the follow-up. Okay. You probably did see the deal that Dave is referring to last week, where Intelsat actually took a combined capacity of GEO, LEO. So there are other ways than going fast forward yourself on actually getting into some of the advantages of multi-orbit. So I think that's what we're trying to look at together with Dave.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, interesting. Let me go, like I said, I've got some individual questions. Let me go to Mark next. You've been pretty outspoken about LEO before and the constellations. Over the last couple of years, has your opinion shifted at all, or do you still hold the same opinion you had about LEO a couple of years ago?
I don't know. What do you think my opinion is?
Well, you were not too you were not too positive about LEO.
No, so we're interested in LEO, and we think that there's benefits of multi-orbit for sure. The things that we're concerned about are, it goes back to the first question, is leaving sufficient resources and space for competition, right? And so that people can enter the market in some rational way. And I think there's a lot of misunderstandings about what makes LEO good or not. So one is, there's a lot of people that think, well, LEOs are better because they're closer to the ground, which doesn't make any sense in the space world, because once I know what the power flux density is on the ground, I should be able to make the same speeds with the same size antenna at the same bands, whether it comes from MEO, LEO, or GEO, right? So it can't be that. One of the other things people misunderstand about LEO is, for instance, part of the reason you can make small antennas is if there's no spatial interference from other satellites. Well, but there are supposed to be multiple constellations at LEO, and there is supposed to be sufficient spatial separation so that multiple operators can be up there. So that's one of the things that we think still needs to be worked. The interference between LEO and GEO. If you want multi-orbit, you've got to have some rational mechanism of sharing. We're concerned about that. The other thing I wince at a little bit is, more than a little, is this notion that what we want to do is put millions of kilograms, millions of tons into space, because on the sustainability issue is real from multiple perspectives. You're seeing, multiple science organizations, Royal Astronomy Society in UK, other organizations weighing in about it, and it is the aggregate total amount of mass in space, total amount of cross-sectional area, which affects astronomy, night sky, re-entry risk, and collision risk. And so what we're really looking for is some context that allows especially the lowest Earth orbits, to be developed in a rational way, that it doesn't become exclusive to the first ones that get there. The analogy I keep bringing up is it would be like if in 1970 somebody said, hey, geo satellites are great for broadcasting long distance, and I'm going to take every orbital slot. Right? That's kind of the environment that we're facing today. So I think the work that we're doing on LEO is really around how do you use that resource efficiently, leave room for multiple players, and then also take into account that lots of countries are going to have more than just an economic interest in space. They're going to have a national security, a sovereign interest in space. So we think that those factors aren't being baked into the way LEO's being developed now. What we'd like to do is develop a portion of it in a way that is more sustainable and open.
I'll get on to the sustainability question in a little bit, but just going back to the original part of the question, your opinion has been consistent. You haven't shifted at all in terms of LEO?
No, I don't know. I mean, we've always been interested in it. We're interested in the latency advantage primarily. That's a good thing. We still don't see that LEO is going to lead to lower bandwidth costs, which I think is lower costs is by far the biggest issue in driving the market expansion, because there's great elasticity of demand with price. Given the geographic concentration of demand, it's hard to see the cost benefit of LEO, and I think that those have been our opinions, right? It's use it to augment for low latency. Don't think it's going to provide an advantage in speed or bandwidth cost.
Okay, let me go to Eva next. You've been the CEO for a little while now, and obviously you made a big splash last year with the OneWeb acquisition. What does the future combination of Eutelsat and OneWeb look like now in your eyes, sort of a year later, and how do you see it now?
Well, I think we're well on the way, and I think I maybe want to start building on what Mark said, because I think actually combining LEO and GEO here is addressing some of the issues that Mark is referring to, because it's actually trying to take a bit of the best of both worlds, because the latency is a real advantage on lots of use cases, whether it's cloud software or whether it's certain use cases like gaming. The latency is a key thing, but the cost advantage of and efficiency of GEO actually delivering capacity where you need it, especially with the new FlexSats, is a great advantage as well. So combining the two, just as you do in telecom, having multiple networks that you can kind of switch in between depending on where you are and what your needs are, is what we really fundamentally see in the combination of the OneWeb and Eutelsat. And we moved forward with this last summer because we simply saw that this needed somewhat of a fast forward. In order to really be able to do integrated products together, think the networks together, build the Gen 2 of OneWeb with a multi-orbit strategy in mind, start actually commercializing a lot of OneWeb. OneWeb is a company that just this past year started commercializing and leaning into Eutelsat for actually adding on additional commercializing. We think all of those points that we saw in the original combination are coming true. Now we just need to get it fully closed. That it takes a little bit of a while. Mark has experience with that, trying to get things through all the kind of legal authorities and that needs to approve such a deal. But luckily, given we were already shareholders in OneWeb, we actually have a good collaboration that's proven the points we saw on it a year ago.
Fantastic. Let me go on to David from Globalstar next. Many have rightly hailed Globalstar for the deal that you did with and partnering with Apple. What do you see as the implications of this deal for the industry as a whole, though?
Yeah, I think it's undeniable that big tech's involvement in the industry now has, and we've seen it in our dealings with our partners around the world in different facets of our business, provided incredible credibility to the industry as a whole. And I think you're seeing additional acceleration in innovation as well. So I think it's the big tech companies being involved in the industry now is really what's driving. I mean, the gentleman before this panel, is a case in point, right? I mean, it's just amazing developments coming out of all the big tech firms, and I think we're going to continue to see massive acceleration on the innovation front.
Tim, did you have something?
Yeah, I think what's especially telling with it is the culture change. The way that these companies operate, develop products, take risks, iterate, and then have a very, very high rate of learning, I think is kind of more of the startup mentality in Silicon Valley, but of course at scale. And so I'm super interested to see how that kind of rapid pace of innovation and ability to take risks, I'm sure they're completely okay if this ends up being a loss leader for very, very long periods of time. And so I think that's going to be very interesting to witness for sure.
One of the things that's happened here is our industry has become much more mainstream in the last few years than it was, let's say, a while back. And I think what's happened here with Globalstar and Apple, big deal. I think you're going to see more of that with the very large global tech players, and I think it's a very good thing for the industry and for consumers at the end of the day. And it does add a tailwind to what we're trying to do and become much more integrated in the global networks.
Yeah. Long term, I mean, speaking on behalf of my generation and kind of younger generations, you're not going to really care where your service is coming from, and you're not going to really care where your physical location is. So if you use customer as the North Star long term, and you ask yourself, is any customer in the future ever going to even care where their data or connectivity is coming from? The answer is obviously no. It's going to get more like we have with cloud software, where you don't really know where the software is coming from, but you're able to log into the same thing everywhere in any device. And I think connectivity, just as a general rule, is going to trend more that direction. And so I think that's where more of the convergence of cell and kind of other networks, I certainly don't see that ever reversing, honestly. It's really more of a tech problem, and how quickly is it going to happen, and then who are the teams that are going to build it.
I agree with you, Tim, but I do think that there are a few governments and sovereignty questions that is popping up and becoming a bigger driver for a lot of us. And I think even though consumers won't care, we'll have various governments who will say, okay, this data, that needs to stay here. We don't want you to have certain other nationalities involved in developing XYZ of your network, because we see that as sensitive elements of it. So I think it will be a balance between that, and it's definitely a topic that since February 24th last year has become kind of a much bigger monster in this industry in terms of sovereignty. It's not the consumers that's asking for it, but I do think we'll have some of those governmental bodies trying to help us or assist us in thinking through how we should then think who are friends and who are foes in it, and put some limits to the other was kind of like, let's just go global consumer trend.
Yeah. One other thing we've got to deal with is, I think people should understand that it's going to be price. In order for us to get to what Tim's describing, airtime prices for satellite bandwidth are going to have to come way down. What's the raw ingredient for airtime pricing is spectrum. We've been seeing spectrum flow from space to terrestrial in a way that makes that problem even worse, because what people are looking at is not just the absolute price, but the relative price for connectivity compared to terrestrial. But then I'm going to go back to, if you look at the way terrestrial spectrum is allocated within countries, it's under the control of those countries. So they don't have to worry so much that big foreign operator is going to come in and in some ways, to Ava's point, use that spectrum in ways that are inconsistent with their national interest. So I think that's going back to this whole issue about consolidation, the way things work. You know, Douglas Adams in his Dirk Gently books talked about the fundamental interconnectedness of all things. People really need to pay attention to all these issues that are surfacing in the space world now about inline events, look angles, EPFD, sustainability. Every one of these issues is going to come back in a very important way to all the things that we're talking about now, especially spectrum. And I think that's one of the things that people need to be a lot more aware of when we talk about what's happening in space and not be so flippant about reallocating things or allocating them in ways that are inconsistent with the national interest of a lot of the world.
I just want to, just a follow-up question, because I was at a panel yesterday and it was an industry forecast panel, and Susie McBride of Iridium said one of the goals over the next year was that Iridium would become a household name. And we often talk about, I mean, you mentioned the word mainstream, and we talk about, but we've been talking about satellite hopefully becoming mainstream for years. Is this actually going to happen, though? I mean, so I just want to get a quick answer from all of you.
I think it's going back to what Tim said, and I agree with him 100%. Even if it's, forget about the governments, even if it's within a given market or a given region. Like, let's just say North America could come to terms with that it's seamless capacity. The customers do not care where it comes from. They just want their data everywhere, whenever they want it. And the regulatory bodies, which is what you guys are talking about, will get over it eventually. I agree, not between countries necessarily, but potentially in regions. And some of the markets are big enough to justify, like the US specifically, certainly when you combine Canada and the US together with Mexico, it's an amazing opportunity what he's describing. I think in the medium to long run, that's what's going to happen. Maybe not in the short run because the bureaucrats will do what the bureaucrats do, but I think that's where we're headed.
I think in terms of household name, it's a different whether you want to build an actual consumer brand for satellite or whether it would actually be a multiple network seamless integration that operators will do. I think there's a big advantage of having it down on the phone. When is that going to get there? There's another probably couple of panels in this week on direct to phone. But once you get a satellite as a let's use that when we can't get 5G or anything else out there. Satellite's a great option, and whether it's on your phone or on a different type of device, I think is going to be a potential endpoint. Whether for that you need any of us to be a household brand name for it, I'm not sure. We'll probably be working with a lot of partners along, whether it's the telcos or other operators. And then there'll be a few like Starlink also, who is trying to build a B2C business, and there you need the household name and the marketing spent behind it.
Tim, I want to go to you.
Yeah, I was going to say Starlink is a household name, I think. So I think satellite is mainstream from that perspective. Yep.
Okay. Let's go on to let's talk about sustainability, because a couple of you have touched upon that. I mean, across the world, we are talking about sustainability. It's a huge topic. It is somewhat of a contradiction that as we all want to move and live on a more sustainable planet, we are putting up more and more satellites, tens of thousands of satellites, that seems to go directly against this ethos. I'd like to get all of your views on what our industry can do in terms of sustainability. I know you've all got views on this. We'll go across.
Let me just frame it up, and there's folks here who have some very strong opinions, which I generally agree with. But so I was reflecting back on a kind of a parallel problem in cybersecurity. Okay, if you go back 15 years, no one was talking about this. And then as the cyber threat grew and grew over time and became a true nation-state challenge to deal with, it started to get some, people started to give it some mind share. And eventually, and you say notionally 5, 6, 7 years ago, it really became front and center. The cyber threat is real, and we need to do something about it. And it was an all hands on deck approach. It was government, it was industry, it was academia, and now it's converged. I think that's the same approach that we need to get to with respect to space sustainability. And we're not there today. So I just wanted to kind of frame the way I see the problem and it evolving, but we need to get there sooner rather than later.
Okay, I mean, I think we'll have a, let's just get comments from everyone and maybe follow up. David, we'll just go along the line.
Completely agree. I think we have, as we've seen, go back to the innovation comments that people have made, we have very smart people in this industry, incredibly intelligent engineers, and a lot of talented people. This is a problem that we have to deal with, and certainly, to Dave's point, we haven't dealt with it yet as an industry, but clearly we're going to need some smart people to help figure this out.
Yeah, I think as far as sustainability in the industry, so thinking about it in terms of rate limiting steps overall. So obviously capital, that was probably the first one. That's actually been very, very good. And then spectrum and some of the LEO coordination, I've actually started to hear the view from customers that because the conflicting events are so fast and so dynamic, that there actually may be a lot of overall spectrum capacity for many LEOs to actually operate pretty effectively and a little bit better than you would think, because the spot beam conflict when it's geo and they're always crossing is a lot worse than these kind of dynamic events. And so then getting to the space sustainability part and kind of how many satellites we launch, the thing that's top of my mind is maybe not one. We in the US set a good example by banning ASAT weapons tests. I think that particular cause of satellite debris is actually one of the highest. So intentional destructions and demonstrations of anti-satellite attack weapons. So hopefully that ends. And then as far as LEOs themselves, I think it's really just going to be a lot of technology to coordinate. But on the launcher side, kind of up mass, down mass, I've heard a lot of talk about this sort of potential regulatory framework. If you launch 20, you got to take 20 down or take 2 down. I think that's going to be pretty challenging on the economics because rockets are very nonlinear in their payload performance. So if you're going to take something down, it's going to end up costing quite a lot of payload capacity, especially if you're going to higher orbits. And so certainly if that kind of thing got introduced, I think it'd be quite costly. It would impose a pretty huge tax on the overall industry economics.
Well, there's a lot of angst, but there's not been as much focus on actual metrics and figuring out how to apportion the capacity in space. So there are a number of organizations that have been working on quantifying what's called carrying capacity, which is the amount of mass, cross-sectional area that you can have in given orbits. MIT's done some really good work on this, so have some universities in Europe, and there are a number of other organizations that have picked up on this. And the big thing on a lot of the, let's say on the collision risk, is it's not a deterministic problem. There's a lot of stochastic random components, partly because there's a large amount of untrackable debris. So the notion that you can just sort of deal with this by good behavior with an unbounded amount of mass and cross-section in orbits doesn't make any sense. I think that's the area that we need to focus on. And there's also been a lot of angst about launch licensing as a mechanism to control it. I don't think that's what the answer is going to be, because there's too many places you can go to get around launch licenses. Right? There's quite a few jurisdictions that are willing to license almost anything. So I think the real answer is going to come from landing rights, because countries that are concerned about sustainability can very simply just say, if you want landing rights in our country, all constellations need to conform to these constraints. And I think we're actually seeing movement in that area finally. And I don't think that this is going to be a limitation for most constellations. If you're talking about constellations of hundreds of satellites in the hundreds of kilograms, there's an enormous amount of space. If you're talking about satellite constellations with metric ton or 2 metric ton satellites and many thousands of those, there's not a lot of room for those in the low Earth orbits. But the flip side is you don't have to use mass and cross-sectional area as the only way to achieve better performance in LEO. I mean, that's one of the things we've been doing with our payloads, and we're looking at applying that in LEO. But in GEO, we've gone from 100 gigabits to hundreds of gigabits to thousands of gigabits in satellites that all have the same form factor, right? We don't have to increase the mass by a factor of 8 to get a factor of 8 or 10 increase in throughput. So I think that's what you want in LEO. If you turn it into who can launch the most mass the fastest, that's a really dangerous, approach. And I think that we are going to see pushback on the landing rights front.
I agree, and I maybe want to start where Dave started, back in an industry where we are in a transformational period from a relatively well-behaved geostationary, a couple of hundred satellites at any point in time, regulation around when to park them on the orbit for deorbited satellites. So that all behaved reasonably well. And then the last 5-8 years of arrival of constellations, which is just adding many more objects in low orbit with many more kilos, as you were referring to. I think that's where you need to find kind of a common behavior and align things. And things are happening. In Europe, there's lots of things happening around net zero space and space traffic management. There are discussions with the US, because I think you need some of the big, significant markets to actually come in and align on this. And landing rights is definitely a good way of trying to enforce that regulation. Europe needs to come together on this, because it doesn't make sense that Germany and France and Spain has 3 different rights. So, and the EU is aware that they need to come together as one market. And if the EU and the US have fairly similar, or maybe even the same type of regulation, it's actually something that you will start being able to impose, especially in the LEO space, because I think that's where we're seeing the big things. And some of the progress is already happening. The US is lowering from 25 to 5 years on deorbiting satellites in LEO space. It's a good first step. What should be the next and the third and the fourth and the fifth step to actually get to something where we see, okay, now we're starting to see a way that also works for LEO, a bit like we've seen in GEO for the last 20, 25, 30 years.
Okay. I'm going to do something slightly dangerous with the satellite panel. I'm going to ask for a one-word answer question, which usually ends in failure because people go talking for a little while.
You get a blank stare.
So we're going to try something here. I mean, we talked about angst. We talked about where the industry is in terms of dealing with sustainability. So I'm going to ask a question where I'm going to ask you for a mark out of 10. So I just want you to give me a number. So in terms of how the industry is dealing with the sustainability issue so far, with 10 being excellent and 0 being terrible, give the industry a score of where we are right now of dealing with the sustainability issue. I just want a number, no explanations, just give us a number. 0 terrible, 10 excellent. So we'll go across this way. We'll go across this way. Give us a number.
3.
0.
5.
4.
2.
I guess we've got quite a lot to do to deal with that.
Look, we behaved, right?
Yeah, I mean, that was that's the first successful time I've done that.
I know,
as well.
take that home.
I know, I should just stop now, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, you can make progress. It's fine.
You started talking.
I ruined it.
Okay, let's go. We've only got about 10 minutes left, but that was a super interesting question. Really appreciate having, I know everyone wanted to talk about that today, so appreciate those comments. Let's talk a little bit about consumer broadband. We touched upon it early on. We often talk about the other 3 billion, the other 4 billion, and it often feels like it's been the holy grail for our industry to connect them. Yet business plans to do this, as we've discussed, have proved far from easy, and we've just had obviously Amazon on stage today. Are things, and you mentioned also about the market increasing significantly, are things about to change significantly in terms of consumer broadband by satellite? Are we at that point now where we are going to make tangible progress, the type of progress we've talked about for years, but actually hasn't happened? Ava, you want to start?
Yes, I think so, because I think consumer broadband has been a supply-constrained market. We've had delays on various satellites coming up. They're actually trying to serve this. OneWeb has had delayed actually trying to come with an alternative to Starlink. Starlink is out there serving the market now and doing a super job of it. But I think it's a supply constraint. I think if we get the supply out there, we get the value propositions out to both B2 business customers and consumers, I think it actually will happen, yes.
Fantastic.
So the problem with consumer broadband is that the demand, per capita demand for bandwidth grows by 20 to 30% a year. Right? So that means you can't say that you've met it at a point in time. What you have to do is you have to match that trajectory. So just as an example, if you have satellites that are the same, if you met that demand in 2023, in 2024, either you need 20 to 30% more satellites each year, or your service is 20 to 30% worse, or you have 20 to 30% less customers. So I think those are the choices, okay, given that people want more bandwidth every year. So that's why you go to this sustainability thing. Obviously, putting 20 to 30% more satellites every year to maintain a consumer broadband business doesn't work at any orbit. So that's why we're so focused on this issue. We've been in the business for 10 years, right? The service that we offer today is roughly 10 times better than it was 10 years ago. But we still have a long way to go. And it's a treadmill that doesn't end. I think that until we get acknowledgement of that, satellite's going to have a difficult time scaling in the consumer broadband space.
Tim, what do you think?
Yeah, I don't know if I have a super well-formed view on when satellite broadband is going to connect to the unconnected, but I do think one thing I think a lot about and get asked is certainly, how does space affect climate and other kind of very difficult problems on Earth, especially given our company's long-term mission is to put 1 million people on Mars and help SpaceX and other companies hopefully go achieve that goal. And so the biggest thing I think about is if you have 3 or 4 billion people on Earth and the amount of genius and intellectual capital that's effectively locked up with not a lot of connectivity to the high rate of learning tools that, of course, having internet and connectivity provides, I think we certainly have a big responsibility in this industry to connect as many of the smartest people in the world and unlock that potential to solve these really hard problems. And I also think space is a very inspiring industry, and I think that's why it's becoming more mainstream over the last 2 decades with the advent of commercial space, is because it's very sexy, it's very cool, it's very inspiring, and I think we all here, and even myself, are going to have the work we directly do in pushing the industry forward, but we're also going to have a really big lever arm in who we inspire to join this industry. And I think there's just been too many smart people joining in, tech and software and other very, very interesting things, and I think having more intelligent people working in the space industry is going to be a really good thing for us long term. So I'm excited to go do it.
Yeah, I think Tim makes great points, but I don't think it's a technical problem. I think we could reach those other 3 billion, other 4 billion people with satellites, no doubt. The issue is many of us are public companies, and we do quarterly earnings calls and quarterly release of earnings, and the profitability and the business case needs to be there and get closed. It's nice, unfortunately, we would all love to bring glee to children, but we have shareholders to answer to and debt holders to answer to. And I think that's the bigger issue, is that does the business model close? If some of the governments would fund the service for those other 3 billion, other 4 billion people, and bring out the smartest talent in their country because you've now given them that connectivity, that's great. But it's a tough business case to close, as we've seen over the years.
Yeah, so I think it's definitely a challenge, and it's right in front of us. Our view is it's a crawl, walk, run approach. Part of our strategy, and I've said this a couple of times, is to partner with other companies in the industry, outside the industry, around the globe, and to co-invest. And without getting into a lot of detail here, we have partnerships and have co-invested with MNOs in Africa, for example. And we are standing up, I wouldn't say it's full consumer broadband, I'd say we are standing up comms networks in localities and in regions to serve the underserved in those areas, and we're continuing to roll it out. And from a business model standpoint, I generally agree, but the way we've approached it, for us, it is a profitable venture. And that's what I'm saying, you learn how to do it first, and then you can scale.
Okay. I've got one more question here. I mean, I think every year we talk about inflection points within the industry. I mean, you've mentioned yourself a transformative era, and we hear these terms a lot over the last few years. How do you see where we are now as an industry? Because we talk about this all the time. Are we actually there? Is the transformation happening? I mean, it feels like we're permanently at the start of a new era at satellite. So I just would like sort of your final State of the Union address of where we are right now as an industry and where you see us heading. So I'm going to mix up the order here. I'll go with Tim first for this one.
Well, I certainly think the next 10 years are going to be much more amazing than the last 10 years. Yeah, I think, from the launch perspective, we're definitely at an inflection point. I think Starship launching is going to be very, very cool. I do think it'll be successful eventually. It's a very ambitious project, but quite awesome. And then, for us, obviously, I flew here from Cape Canaveral. We're doing our first launch. So for our company, certainly, I feel we're at an inflection point of showing a 3D printing rocket is going to be a really great economic enabler for the future of other satellite companies on this stage, hopefully.
We go to David of Global Star.
Yeah, I go back to what I said earlier. I do think it is an inflection point, and I think mainly because the broader telecom market has really embraced the satellite market, which they've never done before. You look at 3GPP, everything that's going on there with Release 17 and narrowband IoT. I mean, the entire telecom ecosystem is embracing Qualcomm, our Qualcomm announcement. They're embracing what we're doing as companies, and the rate of investment in the industry, especially by the big tech companies again, really has never been that way before. So I do think we are at an inflection point.
Yeah, I think we're at the point now where industry, by and large, is looking to the satellite comms industry as part of the solution up front versus maybe after, as an afterthought. And I think that's a big change from where we were a few years ago.
And just before I go to Mark, just tell us about where you see Intelsat playing in that sort of transformation. Because obviously you are one of the big, storied names in our industry, and you've come to see a very interesting time for the company. Tell us about where you're going to position Intelsat during this era.
Well, I may have mentioned this before, or I may have just thought about it, but we have close partnerships with 7 of the 10 largest telcos in the world. When I talked about us being part of the upfront solution set, that's exactly what was on my mind. Commercial aviation, we have a strong presence there. We are winning a lot of new business globally, from the full-service providers all the way down to the low-cost providers. We're adding a lot of new capability. I talked about our partnership with OneWeb, and we are now in final flight tests of a electronically steered antenna that will serve multi-orbit, and that's getting a lot of positive attention from the industry. And I could just go on from vertical to vertical, but I see us extremely well positioned going forward. Our network, from a reliability standpoint, is first in class. The quality of what we deliver and how we deliver it, and our focus on the customer as a service provider, again, I also think is best in industry. So we're going to be very competitive going forward.
Let me go to Mark, then Eva to wrap up.
Yeah. So I think we could be at an inflection point, but the question is, what's inflecting? And what I would say is, satellite in its history has been good at broadcast, but we're in a unicast world. Satellite has never been good at unicast, right? The issue is, how do we make enormous amounts of bandwidth, drive down the cost of bandwidth? That's what the issue is in order to get bigger markets. And what's happening right now is we're doing it by scaling mass and cross-section in space. And that's not, it's literally not sustainable, either economically or environmentally. So the inflection point, what we think, is really about how do you scale unicast, and it's never been done in satellite before. I think it's something we've been focused on. I mean, that was the opportunity for us as a small company. We've been very focused on productivity. That, I think, until we as an industry get our arms around that, and then remember, satellite also has this history of multinational cooperation, which is essential because space is shared. How do we reconcile scaling unicast bandwidth with multinational universal access to space? We're not even really defining the problems well yet.
Okay.
Try to be short.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure it's an inflection point, but I do think it's a big turn in the road because, as Mark was saying, this has been an industry that's been living greatly off broadcasting and video. And I think we're all seeing that market as continuing for a bunch of years, but in structural decline. And this move over to connectivity and finding what is the right multi-orbit network utilization, an effective network way of serving connectivity in a good word. That is a market that's out there. We need to bring down cost. We need to find out the right way of getting networks well utilized. We need to find the right way of collaborating around the industry. So I think that's a journey, whether it's an inflection point or it's many small steps and some missteps and getting back on track. I think that's more what we're talking about.
Fantastic. Well, we're just about out of time. Let's give our panelists a big round of applause.
I should start applauding too.
So that concludes the opening general session. Hope you enjoy the rest of Satellite, the exhibit hall, and the conversations and the networking. Appreciate having you here today. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much.